So here's how I define Agile. It's about continuous improvement. So when we're thinking about this big Agile, it's about how do we get better. But it's not just about getting better, because what can happen over time, and I'm sure all of you have probably experienced this at some point in your life, is you get a little bit better, and then you get a little bit better, and then you get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And then you end up right where you began, right? So just by a series of getting better, getting better, getting better, you end up right where you start. And this first better might even be like a big thing where we're going to do a big organizational change and change a bunch of things. And then through a series of decisions, you end up right where you started, right? Nothing has gotten better. But each of these decisions, somebody said, oh yeah, no, that would make our lives better. Oh yeah, that would make our lives better. So what Agile really is, it's about this continuous improvement, but it's continuously improving in such a way that you can continuously improve more in the future. So that's why it's important to really understand the mindset and the science behind agility and behind Agile. Because you're going to be faced with a ton of different decisions and a ton of different problems that you need to solve every single day. And if you start to choose the direction that takes you off of the Agile path, you're going to end up in one of these loops. And you're just going to keep ending up where you began. And you're going to, why do I keep having the same problem? It keeps going back. And make another series of decisions, and you end up wherever you started again. So when you're using Agile and thinking Agile, it is about getting that constant improvement, constantly getting better. In the Agile Manifesto, it's basically, when you look at it, it's best described, or when you're thinking about it, it's road signs. So as you're going down this path and you're kind of trying to decide, do I get better this way, or do I get better this way? The Agile Manifesto kind of helps you decide which way to go. So when we'll get into it, and we'll actually break apart at some point to kind of look deep into the Agile Manifesto and understand what the principles and the values are for Agile. But that's really what it's about. It's understanding how to make decisions properly. Okay. People need to be empowered. So let's get rid of managers. People aren't getting promotions now, so let's get a group together to give people promotions. That group's not really helping us retain people, so let's really focus that group into a key group of people. So it's like 3 or 4 people to kind of really make it so people can get promotions and get better. You know what, people aren't getting that feedback properly from that group. Let's really just give everybody one person they can go to kind of help them get work done. That person really seems to be able to drive people to get work done. You know, people seem to be a little bit on edge and they seem to work a little bit harder. Let's put them in charge of people so that they can watch them and make sure they're getting all their work done. You know what, that person, they're not having enough responsibility. There's all these other roles that are kind of getting in the way. Why don't we give them more responsibility on defining which work they can do and how we're going to work? Maybe we should get rid of managers. People don't seem to be autonomous. So that's an example of each of those decisions was a very valid decision, but it wasn't following the road signs. At some point, you got turned around. You were going down the wrong way on a one-way street. You weren't going towards your destination anymore. You were going off into someplace else. That's an example of this decision loop where you end up in. The other thing about Scrum is it's based off the scientific method. Does everybody know what the scientific method is? Basically, you craft a hypothesis, you run some experiments, you see what the outcomes are, you test it against your hypothesis, and you determine whether or not your hypothesis was true. Right? So it's how we've built our modern world, is off of the scientific method. It came out in, the 14th century, 15th century, something around there. Maybe 16th century is really when the scientific method took off. But that's what it's based off of. So when you think about Scrum and the idea of a sprint and different ceremonies, when you think of a sprint, it's basically an experiment. It's a set time experiment. So you start your experiment with planning, you run your experiment until the end, you review it at the end, and then you have a place where you analyze the outcomes of that experiment and determine what the next experiment is. So when you're thinking about what the experiment is, it's if we work in this way, how much work do we actually finish by the end of the sprint? So we're always trying to figure out, how do we finish more work? How do we finish our work with more quality? How do we get it so that we can release more often, get our work to release more often? How do we get it so that it doesn't take us so long to do this, right? Those are those types of questions that we're asking ourselves. And then we create our hypothesis. If we work in this way, we should be able to complete this much work. And then you test it. And you go, ooh, we did not finish that much work. In fact, we finished less work than the time before. Maybe we should either reassess this experiment and try a different one, or maybe we try to improve upon our current experiment and see if it was maybe just we executed wrong or something like that. So that's kind of the way you're thinking about the sprint. And when we think about where Scrum comes from, the concept of Scrum, it comes from two very important places where they learned a lot of different lessons. The first is small companies, startups, those types of companies. Second is large companies. And it's actually trying to mix the best of both. So from large companies, something that they learned is if you have a hard problem to solve, let's say your competitor just released a new camera, you need to get a brand new camera out as quickly as possible, or just released a new phone, you need to get a new phone out to compete with the other company's phone. The best thing to do is take some people, take them out of their regular jobs, put them over in a building somewhere or some other room, give them all the skills they need, all the resources they need, and say, we're going to be back in 3 months, and by the end, have us a better phone. And more often than not, those people that went off and just worked together and they have all the skills, it's software developers, it's hardware engineers, it's scientists, it's even potentially even people that aren't even in technology, business people, marketing people, all that. If they go off and just work on building a better phone, they're going to come back with a better phone. So that's the first lesson learned. And if we think about Scrum, how that's adopted is you have a team. You have all the skills that you need within that team, and you give them a set amount of time to just go off and work on what they need to work on, the sprint, the idea of the sprint. Okay. The other lessons that it really came from is startups. So the big thing about the startup is always trying to deliver to your customer something of value so that they'll pay you money so you can pay for next week's salary, right? So you're trying to build that momentum within a startup. So when you think about how that relates to Scrum, we're always trying to get a potentially releasable product, something that we can give to our customer, right? Say, here's how I've made your life better. Are you going to pay me for it, right? So that's the big lesson that was learned from startups. So it's about small increments, potentially releasable or releasable items, so that at any point you could say, oh shoot, we need more money, release this and start getting us money back so we can start paying for things. So those are the two big areas that developed over centuries, those understandings that have helped define what Scrum or where Scrum came from. The first thing you do is always, you need to understand what is the work and why are we doing it, right? So if you think of what we started yesterday, or last session was, why are any of us meeting? What is it? What is the purpose for us? That's really where you started. This is where backlog refinement. So in this one, you're trying to understand what is the work, why are we doing it, and what does it mean to be successful? So how do we know we've successfully completed this work and met our purpose? All the other stuff you've heard about in backlog refinement are just experiments that other teams have done in order to meet this purpose for backlog refinement. From there, you go off to the next part, and that is sprint planning. This actually has two parts. So part one, this is what I call capacity planning. And for the majority of people, this is what they think sprint planning is. And capacity planning is basically how much can we get done? It's answering that question. For the most part, what you're doing is you're asking yourself, what are our prior commitments to determine how much time we actually have. Prior commitments are personal, team, or organizational commitments. Next thing you do is now you come and look at this backlog, and you look at the top item, and you ask the question, do we as a team reasonably expect we can complete that item within the sprint? And if the answer is yes, you pull it in, and you can repeat, go to the next item. Do we as a team reasonably expect we can complete that item within the sprint? And you repeat that process until you get to a point where you go, do we as a team reasonably expect that we can complete that item within the sprint? And when the answer is no, you say, well, then our sprint, we're done. We filled up our sprint. Okay? So it's a repeatable process. So the important thing to remember is you only go down this as far as you reasonably expect you can complete. It's not helping anybody by saying, oh, we're going to go all the way down to here and not finish 3/4 of our sprint, right? It doesn't help us. It doesn't help the experiment. It doesn't help us improve over time. It's about what we can actually complete. Because this is an important distinction in here is we're only going to get done the amount of work that we can get done given our current state. That's not going to change. And for most teams, that's what they think sprint planning is, but there's actually a part two, which I just call design session. It's now you have all these items in your sprint, and you say, okay, we just pulled in these 4 items. Now, how the heck are we going to solve all these problems? How the heck are we going to get all these things done? In there, I call it design session. This term just came out of Best Buy, because you're kind of designing how are we going to architect it, how are we going to test this, locked and loaded. You see, if we're able to stick to this plan, we're able to finish everything by the future. So that's the biggest thing that we're trying to go. So understanding when you're in this state and when you're in this state is very important, because lots of groups get these two states mixed up. So you have your sprint plan, and like I said, it's locked and loaded, it's in your board. You're like, yeah, if we finish all the stuff on these dates at these times, we're totally going to rock it. Everything's going to be done by the end of the sprint. And then life happens. So we have our sprint as an experiment, but each day is an experiment. And you say at the start of the day or whenever you do your daily scrum, you ask the question, okay, what do we expect to complete today, given who's at the office keeping agile? So that's why I call it daily planning. If you get stuck, and every team does it, so I'm sure at some point you were, but try to remember these words. If you get stuck into a place of work, does this mean anything to you? Is there any value? If you think about the startup, this is where in a startup, you go to your customers and say, are you going to buy this from me or not yet? This one is about, given where we are right now and the amount of value we've delivered you, should we continue to go in this direction or should we choose a different direction to go into? Right? So this is also part of the experiment. And this has to do with the product experiment in that last week we talked about a product and it's a living, breathing, growing, evolving thing. The thing though about it, you know what, this application we've been building for the past 6 months, it's kind of getting really hard to work into. Maybe we need to look at how we rebuild it or how we work on some tech debt in order to make this better. We haven't really been communicating with business that much. How do we get it so we can communicate with business, or business, we haven't really been communicating with technology. How do we get it so we're more closely aligned on things? You know, we've been making some changes and breaking other people's stuff. How do we better test our stuff so that we're not stepping over each other's toes? All those types of questions you're answering in here. So this is where you stop. You put down the work for a couple of hours, take a couple breaths, you look at the whole process and you say, how do we make that better? How do we make our lives better? How do we make our environments better? All of these are for when you do talking All the rest of the time is doing. Right? So this is for the different types of planning that you need to do, and the different types of talking and planning and talking about how to do things better or talking about how to do things. All the rest of the time is for actually doing work. So if you ever find yourself talking about doing something and not doing that thing, you're probably doing one of these. And so it's important, right? What's causing you to have way too many conversations? Or if you're talking about, we don't know how to successfully complete this item or what it means to be done, it means you probably need to focus back into this area. So if in this particular circumstance, let's say finance family needs something from us. There's ideal world and then where we are right now. In an ideal world, they wouldn't need that. They would be able to just make the changes themselves because they have access to all the skills. So if they need something from some system, they can come and say, hey, I need to make changes to the system. This is what we're intending to change. Is this going to break anybody's other stuff? No, okay, we're going to make those changes and then we're going to be good to go away. That's ideal world. They have all the skills. They don't need you. In the real world, where we are right now, we haven't quite built those muscles. So if they come and ask, then we kind of go, we're going to have to really plan with you guys on how we're going to build this stuff. So you guys need to be a part of our design session to figure out how we're going to plan it so that if we need to connect on things, we know. Maybe one of you should be coming to our stand-ups, and then maybe we do a retrospective together at some point. This is why getting that mindset right is important, because you're going to be hit with a million of these micro decisions all the time, and using that agile mindset will allow you to make the right decision, and the right decision for now that allows you to even get better in the future. So if the right decision now is, you know what, maybe you guys should come and work with us and build it with us so that you can learn how to do it yourself. So the next time you don't need to ask us to do it, you can just do it for yourself, right? Instead of, oh no, we'll just do it. You guys just go over there and we'll do it, and you code it and you kick it off to them at the end, and then the next time they have the exact same problem, you're having to do the exact same thing again, right? So it's that agile thinking, agile decision making.